All right, good morning, everybody. I want to acknowledge that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional, the unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq people, and we believe in the peace and friendship treaties signed on this territory. This is Executive Committee. This is May 27th. Holy cow. Is it May 27th? Really? Truly? Holy cow. Time flies. You know, I went to a July 4th party on Friday, believe it or not. I don't know if any of the rest of you were there, but because the U.S. Consul General is leaving, so they had an early July 4th party. It just seemed like June flew by. So I see our committee members are here. Everybody's here, I think. So thank you all for joining. Councillor, oh, you're on the committee. Who's not on the committee? Councillor Morse, are you always on this? No. You're a guest? Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. You get special privileges. Nice to see Councillor Russell back, looking, you know, good and fit as a fiddle and ready to go. Good to see you back, Paul. I will ask for somebody to approve the minutes of April 22nd. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Mason. All in favor? Opposed? That is acknowledged. The order of business, Madam Clerk.
There are no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Anybody else? If not, does somebody want to approve the order of business? Move the order of business as circulated. Councillor Russell, seconded by Councillor Cuddle. All in favor? Done like dinner. Business arising calls for declaration of conflict of interest. Motions of reconsideration, there are none. Rescission, none. Deferred business, none. Tabled matters, none. Correspondence, Madam Clerk.
No correspondence was received from the clerk's office.
Thank you. Petitions.
No petitions.
Thank you. No presentations either, Madam Clerk. Public participation, we have one person who has registered, Peter Spruan. I welcome you to come forward. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Oh, it's on, I guess. I'm Peter Spruan. I live at 206 Ingham Drive in Fall River. I stand before you today not just as representative of our Fall River Village, but as a voice for a community that feels completely abandoned and unheard. I'm here to address the significant and troubling issues surrounding the Ingham Drive Site C proposed development. In 2022, our community participated in the municipal planning process, meeting all requirements, engaging in extensive dialogue. The resulting decision of HRM Regional Council to deny the proposal development clearly took into account the numerous valid and serious concerns raised by the overwhelming number of the community members. Yet the province's recent Bill 329 has overridden this decision, granting the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing the power to push forward with the development without further municipal government input or any community engagement whatsoever. This unilateral decision has left the entire community feeling sidelined and disregarded and questioning if democracy is now dead in our province. Since the province overturned the municipality decision, there has been no meaningful follow-up or involvement from the municipality regarding this matter, with the exception or support of our local councillor. The absence of the action is not only extremely disappointing, but it also undermines the trust and faith we place in our elected government officials. This issue might seem localized to some, but I urge you to consider the broader implications. This abuse of power by the provincial government could very well reach the area served by any HRM councillor, as through Bill 329, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing can make any area, or indeed all of HRM's special planning area, rendering the municipal government planning process null and void. The developer who lives in our community has chosen to not once engage with the residents to seek a solution, and given the developer's desire to push forward with a high-density development in the middle of a rural area with no supporting infrastructure, can only conclude that these actions are driven purely by financial interests rather than the interest of addressing the concerns of our community. To emphasize our plight, we shared with you a letter sent by the community to the Premier of Nova Scotia, which is yet to receive a reply. Despite the best efforts of residents and the Fall River electorate to engage with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, these requests for community engagements have also been ignored to date, with no direct engagement from the minister with the community that is so negatively impacted by the special planning order. The community has consistently expressed safety concerns regarding the proposed development through the various channels, including overflow, crowds at community engagement sessions, more than 400 letters of opposition from virtually every resident of the impacted community, and more than 700 responses from concerned citizens to surveys conducted by HMR Planning and Development. The local provincial MLA expressed a commitment to preserving and protecting neighborhoods, saying in the media, "We love our neighborhoods and want to do everything we can to preserve and protect where we live." Yet the serious safety and other valid concerns raised countless times by the community have been ignored by our elected provincial officials. The fears expressed by many of you on HMR Council, including the Mayor, regarding the potential dangers of provincial government overreach and the absence of transparent democratic decision-making afforded under the sweeping and unilateral decision-making powers provided to a single minister under Bill 329 have come to roost in our Fall River. The Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing told CBC back in November 2023 interview that he's only planning to approve projects that turn down that have HMR staff recommendation and that are compliant with the municipal planning strategy. This was again repeated by the minister during the March 5th, 2024 House of Assembly proceedings. When asked about the proposed development at an Opportunity Site C, I can tell you it was compliant with the municipal planning strategy. The proposed development is not compliant with already established MPS, which per the minister's own words, which he repeated multiple times in the public forums, means Opportunity Site C in Fall River is not suitable to be designated as special planning. Think of the situation that arising. A single provincial minister, armed with the sweeping powers of Bill 329, has not only ordered the Fall River site to be an SPA, but indicated in the most recent House of Assembly proceedings that he only needs to make one change to the already established MPS, a direct contradiction to the minister's stated words that to be a special planning area, it is complete with the municipal planning strategy, or compliant, sorry. This is not merely a simple single change that the minister is planning to push through. Dropping the MPS requirements to have direct access to the proposed development via Cobequid Road is a material requirement. A unilateral decision by the minister to potentially remove the MPS requirements for direct access to the proposed development via Cobequid Road creates a multitude of unnecessary and very serious safety concerns for the community. It will result in no direct access to the development other than a long and narrow, winding, and extremely dangerous residential street. Have we learned nothing from the horrific wildfires that hit our province and the importance of having second egress? Despite the rejections at Halifax Regional Council and the Northwest Community Council, which included active engagement in the community and the Fall River electorate throughout this process to share their numerous safety and other concerns associated with the proposed development, the unilateral SPA order has been rendered by the minister. A planning philosophy based on anything, anywhere, embodied by sweeping powers under Bill 329 will simply not serve the best interests of our amazing city. In order to designate the Fall River site as an SPA is a glaring example of the flawed philosophy. The community expressed an openness for an appropriate alternative development proposal with density and scale that is best suited for the site. I hope my voice underscores the gravity of the situation, highlighting the community's countless efforts to share numerous safety hazards and other serious concerns associated with the proposed development, and the lack of support from both municipal and provincial levels of government. To date, the voices of the community have been ignored, and it's time for solidarity and action from you, our elected municipal leaders. Councillor Mayor, we implore you to take a stand with the electorate of Fall River so this overreach by the provincial government is stopped in its tracks. The Fall River situation, if left unchecked, will lay the way for other developments to move forward, making no sense, rendering the HRM planning process redundant. Let us work together to ensure that our community voice is not silenced. Let us protect the integrity of the HRM planning process and the safety of our neighborhoods. Your decision will echo throughout the municipality, and we must ensure that it reflects the will and the welfare of the people you serve.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? If there's nobody else, Information items brought forward. Reports. The first one is the Halifax Regional Municipality Emergency Management Program. Is that Bill Moore that's going to? Bill, are you going to lead us off and introduce who you have?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the Executive Standing Committee. Bill Moore, Executive Director of Community Safety. We're here this morning to brief you on a report that KI Emergency Management has completed on behalf of HRM. I have with me Mr. Larry Jones, one of the consultants and the author of the report. I'll let Larry kind of take you through the report, and then we'll be available for any questions.
Mr. Jones, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I just have a few short slides to guide through what we did with regard to the report. It was undertaken ostensibly in January and completed at the end of March. So the project purpose was to determine the current state of documentation with regard to HRM's emergency management program. So anything to do with emergency management, the documentation that supports it was our aim. Yeah, I see that now. Here we go. So what we did, we reviewed all the documents provided, including the minutes of the EM Planning Committee. We interviewed representatives from each of the business units. And from that, we were able to identify strengths and deficits with the current program. We measured it against the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, better known as EMAP. Those standards I'll provide in the next slide, but gave us a baseline for what large and industry best practice organizations typically use for the emergency management. We then prepared a series of recommendations that can be used for strategic planning, for your improvement efforts, resource allocations, and of course, operational readiness. So again, EMAP is an internationally recognized set of standards. It is a US-based program, but it has been used for about 25 years now. It is similar to CSA, ISO standards, but it is particularly useful in measuring municipal emergency management programs. So it looks to build safer communities with measurable standards. And again, some of the examples, the only other accredited city within Canada is the city of Ottawa, and there are a number of municipalities within the US that use this system. So what we discovered, in a nutshell, there is a significant gap between what constitutes a robust program and then the actual documentation to support it. So the good news is HRM is very well served by the expertise and commitment of the staff and of the practitioners when you have an emergency management event. But your risk exposure could be reduced by adopting a best practices approach for a resilient emergency management program. So what you're lacking is the documentation and structure. So this is what we recommend, to move from your status quo to a measurable and accountable best practices structure. The improvement program, we recommend you improve the program documentation. That is all your plans and guidelines. That will ensure that you have coordination for EM within all your business units and also with all your stakeholders such as federal, provincial, First Nations, and the private sector. And within that documentation, we recommend that you include all pillars of EM, which includes the mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery in your program development. So first step, what will set you on the best path is develop a multi-year strategic plan that describes what HRM EM program is. Well, a vision statement for emergency management, your mission, goals, objectives, and milestones for emergency management program, a method for plan implementation, and a method and schedule for evaluation and revision. So this is what it looks like. This is the most important slide of all. What this shows is what can be done, what the sequence of the documentation improvement or development should be, and what can be done concurrently. So within each box, if it's standalone, then that is sequential, and then as you'll see within the larger purple box in the middle, those are concurrent plans that can be conducted. So as you see, strategic plan for EM is the top priority we would recommend. Part of that will necessitate a review of legislation, your bylaw E100. By updating your strategic plan, an update to E100 would probably be commensurate. So then that sets your strategic plan for where you want to be in 5 years from now. After that, the comprehensive emergency management plan, which would replace your present municipal emergency plan, could be developed. You have ongoing your hazard risk vulnerability assessment. Your business continuity plans are in progress. Commensurate with the SEMP would be a continuity of government plan. That is a separate plan that just addresses the leadership piece, the political leadership for HRM. And then your emergency operations center concept of operations can be developed concurrently as well. Beyond that, we would recommend a review of your emergency management staffing. Again, for a municipality with the scope and breadth of Halifax, a more robust emergency management organization is probably required. There are many ways you can tackle that, but certainly in a centralized form or within the business units, greater expertise is recommended for maintaining an EM program. And then finally, your final step of plans, if you will, is each one of the business units develop their emergency management plan based on the comprehensive one for the HRM, your emergency management training plan, and then a resource management plan. With that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions you might have about the report.
If I could speak now.
Yeah, the CAO first.
Thank you. I wanted to allow Bill the opportunity to do the introduction, but I do want to interject now to thank Bill and Kildoon Consulting for taking this on. After becoming CAO in January of 2023, there's 2 or 3 areas in the municipality that I had particular concern about assessing the maturity of. One being enterprise risk management, another being emergency management. And setting up the community safety department, April 1st last year was the first step in that. The next step after that was to get this document review done by Kildoon. Of course, we managed our way through at least 4 emergency events last year that somewhat delayed the initiation of this work, but I'm really pleased that once it was initiated, it got delivered quickly. And looking forward to hearing council's questions and getting council's support to move forward with really bringing our emergency management to the best level. And one of the things that was really conveyed to me when the consultants presented the report is that right now, we are strong in terms of the fact that we have good people and we are well practiced in terms of responding to emergencies. The resilience piece, though, is of particular concern because without the documentation and without the training, then we may not be resilient if we lost 2 or 3 key individuals. So that is one thing I wanted to convey. I didn't want to leave you with an impression that we think we're doing things terribly now. It's more of a concern about the ongoing resilience of the program.
Thank you, CAO. We'll go to Councillor Mancini. Maybe you can put the motion on the floor and take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll put the following motion on the floor that the Executive Standing Committee recommend that the Halifax Regional Council, 1, accept the recommendations in the attached staff report dated May 2nd, 2024, and 2, direct the CAO to implement the recommendations in the report dated May 2nd, 2024. So moved. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the presentation, Bill and Larry and Greg Akins in the background. Good to see you all. I'm a big fan of certification, like ISO certification, so it makes perfect sense that we look at this type of certification here for our municipality. I am surprised to hear that only one other municipality has it in Canada, however, but good for us pointing this direction. So a couple of questions I have. At a very high level, this type of certification or better documentation, and I don't expect you to go into the specifics, would you have seen a different response or outcome from last year? The CAO alluded to fires, floods, hurricanes. I mean, do you anticipate if this was in place a year ago, would we have had a different response? I know it's a difficult question to ask, but would you potentially, could there have been something different, obviously more improved?
So, yeah, it is a difficult question because it is very subjective.
Right.
What the documentation and written plans will do for you is give you a baseline so you know where you're starting from.
Right.
But as indicated, the response, and that was out of our scope for looking at. We're looking purely at documentation, at after-action reports, so we did read. But what a written plan will do is give you the baseline to start, and others to know what you're going to do and not do and how you're structured. So it can only help, I'm saying, but I can't give you a definitive would it be better or not, but it is always a better baseline because then you know where you're starting from.
And you alluded to that response, as I mentioned too. Is there, in the documentation, is there a guideline of response? And along with that, what about equipment too, right? In years gone by, I heard stories of previous hurricanes, and not recent, but years gone by, of where is that piece of equipment at, right? When the disaster is already upon us. I think we've gotten much, much better at that. But does the documentation look at that type of stuff also?
Well, that's what the EMAP program helps you do. It's a checklist almost that allows you, these are the different things you need to have, and where are your resources, your resource allocation plan. That's why it's indicated as one of those. It's not only just where the equipment is, but volunteers and donations and all of those things. That allows you to account for that in a more coherent form.
Good, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for that work, gentlemen. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you much, Mr. Mayor. Looking forward to the implementation of the report, but I'm more curious of how you're going to engage the local GEM teams, the Joint Emergency Management teams in rural communities. We've been doing the asset mapping. We've been doing the data books in regards to what facilities are out there, what capability, what capacity they have. You know, since Hurricane Juan, I've finally seen 11 now generators on the Eastern Shore. Before we had 0. But since we learned our lessons from Hurricane Juan and subsequent events, we've learned to try to have these comfort centers, relief centers, whatever the case may be. But not all of them are municipal assets. So a lot of our local community volunteers probably know the community like the back of their hand. When an emergency happens, they're the ones on the ground that know the area best and hopefully provide input to the emergency services. I'd like to know how you anticipate the GEM team being incorporated, involved, and educated in this new management process?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hensby and the remainder of the committee, actually this morning I just approved the volunteer coordinator that will be handling the GEM teams. There's a position that was approved last year. The staffing action interviews happened last week. So one of their primary responsibilities will be the coordination of GEM teams and the volunteers, and that will include looking at the resources. One of the things we need to be a little bit careful of in relation to, I'll call it comfort centers, is the spontaneous opening of comfort centers by individuals that may very well be well-meaning, but there is a piece that if HRM asks for it, then we pay the bill and take care of those things. And we may also be in a better position to know one center may be opened than another center based on what is happening. So we don't have people spontaneously setting up things that we're not aware of, especially, for instance, in a forest fire. If we know the fire is going in a certain direction, we probably would not want to open that comfort center. We may want to do one in a different place. So all those pieces are part of the ongoing work. And what hopefully coming out of EMAP through the 73, I think, pieces there, will basically say, there will be a documented report that says, this is what it looks like, this is how it would be activated, this is how we're going to support the volunteers. So it can be not only used as a measuring stick, but also to help us in our building our programs, to make sure that we've documented those pieces and we have them all together. And once we have them, then we can use that to then, as an education tool. So when we bring new GEM members on, we can show them the documentation, this is how it works. And so that's the hope through EMAP, is to get those pieces all together so that we have a comprehensive, so when the question comes up, it shouldn't just have to be, is it in Bill's mind, is it in Eric's mind? We should be able to go and go, I want to know about resources. Oh, that's chapter 17, go to resources, this is what we have, this is where they are, this is how we access them. And the other part of that is that this is not a one and done. Once we have it, then we should be reviewing these on a regular basis to make sure that we're keeping things up to date.
Yeah, the biggest thing I found is that it's not the GEM teams that are eager to open the conference centers, it's the local community anticipating it should be open. And that's where we got to educate the general public in regards to hold tight. You're supposed to have 72 hours preparedness of self-reliance. If there's going to be an emergency, the municipality will determine when and where they should be open. Everybody anticipates automatically they're going to be opened up. So no, that's not the case. So thank you very much. I look forward to the implementation of this. It should be an interesting exercise.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cottle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And great report. Really happy to see that we're, taking kind of a focused approach and moving forward with this. I had some concerns similar to Councillor Hensby about the number of community groups who are getting generators all of a sudden, often from the province, and calling themselves comfort centers, but not even registering with the hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment. So I see like in this, like a robust communication plan is critical, and a continuing to do the hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessments to really make sure we're capturing all of that, because the two aren't connecting, which does lead me to a question about how does this plan align with provincial plans, or where do they intersect, or how is that work being coordinated? One of the great things here is that I see in the list of kind of, the things that are in progress right now, the hazard, risk, and vulnerability being one, the other one being, the business continuity, business plans for the business units, and kind of creating these other pieces as well. And it's also been a concern of mine that I haven't really fully understood how these things are connecting. It feels like all this work is happening in silos, and there's been no overarching strategies. So I do note in this document that the top box is a strategic plan, which I'm assuming all those business units will then fall under that, rather than kind of out there doing their own things. Perhaps that's not happening, but it's not apparent, and so I take some comfort in seeing that we're going to have this overarching community plan. The other piece was about community engagement, and we know we're a regional municipality. Resources vary from community to community, region to region within our regional municipality, and so that community piece still is important, but needs to be coordinated. So I see one of the action plans is to create disaster support community resilient hubs for community. And I'm just wondering if, back to the whole conversation about the comfort centers, what's the difference there? What's the vision there?
Mr. Mayor, through to the councillor. There is a report coming there's a report and another report coming that talks about comfort centers, warming centers, and those type of things. So, and there is a definition of what comfort centers are in there. I would say, when you refer to the community resilient piece, that may not be a comfort center. That may be as simple as a group of people that are able to mobilize. So similar to what the community mobilization team people are doing. So the CMTs are actually doing some community resilience right now. They were involved with the wildfire recovery. So Going directly to the comfort center piece, that would be a building really that has certain amenities in that building. But the community resilient piece is more than that. It's about having the people. It's about having connections into the community so that when something happens and we need to have expertise, going back to Councillor Hensby's comment, expertise around that particular community, that we actually have someone to be able to pick up the phone and call. And that may include, obviously, local councillors, because you're close to that. But it's creating that network of pieces. Going back to your initial comment in relation to the strategy, that's the whole purpose of this, is that there are lots of pieces and lots of good work being done, but there's not a framework, if you will, for them to fit into. And that's what EMAP provides us to. It helps us create a framework that allows us to build out the program. It allows us to measure how we're doing on the program. Because the other part of this is an accreditation program. We're not ready for that. But at some point, we could invite an accreditor in to actually come in, and they'll give us a report card on how well we're doing. Now, that's probably a couple of years away. I think Ottawa has gone through it twice in the accreditation program. But that framework is really allowing all of these pieces to come together. So going back to it, it would be, how does the comfort center relate to the community resilience, relate to the GEMS team? All of those pieces coming together, as opposed to disparate pieces that may be there, but are maybe not completely touching.
Right, okay. That gives me some relief to know that there's some big thinking happening around that, and we're going to get to an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mayor. Building on what Councillor Cuddle said, I think, yeah, like having a strategy and having a plan is always better than not. And I certainly think, you know, there will be a point where our top level strategy, where we're focused on the most important things to hold the city together and get the, you know, the example I always think of is after the, geez, I'm losing track which hurricane it was. I think it was the one before Dorian, where one of our TPW staff said, people are complaining about how slow we are picking up the fallen tree debris. What they're not noticing is that you could drive on a major road from anywhere in HRM to the hospitals, but before the sun came up with the hurricane. So like, there's a certain focus on that first moment, but then there's the second stage, which is, you know, a friend of mine who lives in Mosier River was talking about during Dorian that they were the young person because they're only 45 and they had Starlink and a generator. So they were the only way for 5 days that any of the kids who'd gone down the road they were getting requests on the Facebook group to check on people's parents for a week, right? So having those resources at the community center, had Starlink and a generator, would be awesome, right? Because then everybody could go check their own email and that kind of thing and not rely on her. The strategic plan, comprehensive emergency management plan, emergency operations center concept of operations, and all the other stuff you listed, tremendous amount of work. So I was surprised to see that at the end of your slide, sir, that it said, with, you know, if we work at this, we can get it done in a couple of years. That's a lot of work in a couple of years. I wonder if we have adequate staff. One of my questions are, when does it come back to us to talk about staff? Because one of the things I noticed, and it was a difficult budget season, and probably I should have brought it up then, is, you know, we've gone from an average of 16 activations of the EOC to 64 last year, but it's the same staff over and over again, and I'm sure burnout is an issue, and I think we need to be concerned about that. And also, if we have 64 activations again, how much of it is the same staff dealing with the crisis who should be working on it? And then the last note I'll say, and I'm conscious with Greg Akins in the audience, when my dad was attached to NATO in Norfolk, they tried to simulate moving the continuity of Supreme Allied Command, I think it was CFS Mill Cove at the time, in 1988, and they showed up, and it was like plain old telephone wire and 1950s switchboard and stuff, and then can't run a war from there. A lot of investment had to be made. So we haven't put any thought into, like, beyond maybe we might have to meet somewhere else, like the continuity of government piece is what I'm getting to. That, to me, I was like, that's a real thought. Like, if there was a major incident on the peninsula or in the regional center, what where, how, who of that, that's a huge chunk of work on its own. And I'm wondering are we coming at that really, the way it reads is we're coming out with a blank slate. So those are my two questions are around staff and continuity of government. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great work, though.
Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, in relation to resourcing, so over the last year, we've gone from a staff of 2 to a staff of 6. With 2 positions are being filled now. So there was a comment or a question posed to me at regional council actually around, do we need more resources in emergency management? And my response was, I believe we do, but I'm not sure where we need them. This is now going to help us in relation to that. The other key piece I want to say in resourcing is that this is not, in my opinion, just an EM, emergency management office response. This needs to be a consolidated HRM response. So that means going into the business unit, because the expertise in the business units on doing things, so for instance, Public Works and cleaning trees, they have the expertise, so we need to be able to leveraging their expertise, but that needs to be able to be dovetailed into the EMO office. In addition, we need to be looking, I think, more deeply into our organization, and I go back to my previous role, there was 4 of us in the city that supported Barry Manuel, so there was 4 of us, myself from police, a couple from fire, 1 from Public Works, and 1 from transit, I think it was down there. But they were all trained to be able to step into the EOC so we could have a long operation if required. So I think coming out of the coronavirus pandemic piece, I think we need to step up a little bit on our training to build more internal capacity. The other thing that we've been exploring as well is the ability for surge capacity. So, we probably would not want to staff up an emergency management office to run another wildfire response, because we'd have lots of people around that we wouldn't need to be doing all the time. But there's some interesting work being done in the province with their new EMO and some of the work, and I understand, I haven't been able to verify that they may be even looking at the EMAP program as well on a provincial piece. So we will see whether or not there's an ability for us to look and borrow people, if need be, on a surge capacity on resourcing. But we will need more people at some point. I'm just not quite sure right now, if I'm coming here today, what I'm asking you for.
Okay.
Okay.
If I could.
CAO?
Yes, I wanted to also contribute to Bill's response to those 2 questions. On the staffing front, one other change that we've made this past year is there were a certain group of non-union staff that are not traditionally eligible for overtime. Unionized staff who are working during an emergency event receive overtime pursuant to the collective agreements. We've changed the overtime policy for non-union staff also so that they're compensated if they're working during emergency events, and to assure ourselves that we're in compliance with labor standards. So that was one thing. With respect to continuity of government, we do have work to do there to document it, but I did want to note that as a result of some of the changes that have been made post-COVID, both from a legislative perspective and from a technology perspective, there are many more options for the municipality that have mitigated a lot of risk, because we can do business virtually and we can do business from many different locations. And we do have our EOC and other buildings that have generators, that we can work out of, so.
All right, I'll come back for my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Russell?
Thank you very much. I was pleased to hear you mention Barry Manuel. My first exposure to emergency management was when I was on the school board 23 years ago, and it was September 11th. I had a meeting with the superintendent of schools that day, and we had just found out what was going on when I was meeting with him. So it was then a scramble to determine which schools were going to be able to support all of the populations that were flying into Halifax or Gander or wherever the heck they happened to be flying into, just not the U.S. Shortly after that, I met Barry over at Eric Spicer, and we had a few good conversations. And I had the impression at that time, that emergency management and HRM was in a good place. And I had hoped that it was staying in a good place. The report comes as a little bit of a surprise to see that some rework has to be done. I was pleased to see that some of the work was done in 2020 to get some of the documentation back up, but that so much of it had fallen behind. So I'm also pleased to hear that you have picked that up, CAO, and that we're moving ahead with that. There are going to have to be some changes required. I was looking at bylaw E100, and there are some areas in there that have lack of continuity. Some timeline pieces are missing from there from when, for example, the MEMPC, the Municipal Emergency Management Planning Committee is going to be getting something to executive, and then that would get something to regional council. There's no timeline there. There's no refresh there. That type of thing would have to be considered. I'm interested in what it would take for us to get the EMAP accreditation, and would hope that that would be something that is included in the strategic plan that's coming, as well as an entire roadmap of what it would take for us to get there, including timing. And finally, on slide 8, the priority of actions slide, where it started off listing strategic plan for EM, et cetera. The fourth item there says review emergency management staffing. And what I note there is that it is more than people, it is also equipment, facilities, not just the training, but where will people go? Some of that was touched on with the continuity of government and where will we meet piece. We have some spaces in Sackville that we could certainly meet at if that becomes an option. And we might even use one of those for Northwest Community Council if it's geared up properly. But I would hope to see that more than staffing is reviewed with that we would include, again, facilities and equipment, and we have the emergency broadcast system that is in place with the province. Would we be able to use that? Would we duplicate it? We sort of have that type of thing with HFX Alert, and so I'm wondering if that would be extended. A couple of the other pieces, Councillor Hensby mentioned the GEM teams. I'm wondering if GSAR would be included in the search and response piece. And one of the other things in the bylaw mentions telecommunications. So would we be reaching out to the telcos and things like that? And then there are some pieces in there that are clearly provincial and not municipal. They include income assistance, community services, and health services. So would we coordinate with the province instead of just sharing space with the province? So that's a lot, but I would appreciate some responses to that. Thank you.
I'll try my best. Mr. Mayor, through the councillor, in relation to the bylaw, I mean, that was one of the first things that, I'm not sure if there's ever been a report on emergency management come to the Executive Standing Committee. So
I don't remember one.
When I reviewed the bylaw and we looked at, that was one of the first. So that's why we're here today, because this report was completed. It went to the Emergency Planning Committee just a couple weeks ago, and now we're here Executive Standing. So we're trying to get that part back rolling again, notwithstanding that we may need to look at the bylaw and some of those pieces, including timelines. Your comment around Alert Ready and Halifax Alert. So Alert Ready is the national reporting that will allow disruption over your cell phones, that piercing bing, bing, bing that we hear in the middle of the night, unfortunately. Halifax Alert is a subscription-based platform. It's mass notification. It's Everbridge is the company. We've just actually at the last Emergency Planning Committee, we just tabled an updated policy position on governance, on how that is to be governed. There is a policy. There was no policy in written policy, so that is being created now. And that will be broken down basically on internal usage and then external usage. So there's more coming in relation to that part of it. I would not say Halifax Alert would replace Alert Ready. Alert Ready is really about that notification that everybody needs to know something right away. We have learned some lessons from the wildfire in relation to, for instance, the rescinding of evacuations and using that. So Halifax Alert may be a good process. So we're going to be looking to make sure that that is a solid process, a documented process, and that we're able to update that as we learn more things, including one of the things we're exploring now is potentially pushing that out to all HRM employee phones, so if we need to notify staff. So those are some of the things in the background. In relation to ground search and rescue, GSAR is now reporting through coming to community safety through emergency management. We're working with GSAR now. I've asked for the creation of an MOU. We have a draft now in place because, as you probably are aware, there are 4 teams in HRM. And what I've asked them is that if they could come together, keep their legal identities, but come together as one single unit and then talk about the capabilities that GSAR is able to provide all of HRM. So if we need swiftwater rescue in Sheet Harbor, and Sheet Harbor doesn't happen to have a boat, well, one of the other GSAR teams should be assisting in that. So we have a consolidated report of capabilities that we can deploy across. So we're in the process of working that through now. And there was also a change in the funding, so they're no longer grant funded. So that's being done. And the other piece is, with that capabilities, is that I'm asking them to come forward for a budget ask next year, a single budget ask, so I don't get 4 requests for 4 command trucks. So we're trying to work through that part now with GSAR, but they're doing a lot of good work in that space. In relation to telecoms, yes, there's the Emergency Communication Solution Strategy, very, very good document that was written in 2018, I think it was, that reviewed our telecommunication strategies for both emergency, including alerting, paging, satellite. So I've met with David Thorpe, CIO, and the Commissioner Brad English last week on creating a corporate project to refresh that and bring that back around. And that would include things like backup to TMR, whether we're going to have a backup radio system, all of those pieces that come together, but that needs to be refreshed. And the last part on the provincial coordination, absolutely, I mean, we're not an island. It's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, I think, very interested to see what the province plans to do in between the Nova Scotia Guard and the revamping and the moving around. So for instance, the field communications group that handles the contract for TMR is moving into EMO in this new org. So there'll be some work with the province on how to do that, and in addition, how we can support other municipalities in times of crisis. I think that was pretty well most of your questions. I don't know if I missed one in there.
Additions to the strategic plan, but yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you both for a good evening's read, twice. It's a very sort of academic report in that, right, this is the foundation that we get to build everything from, and a lot of my questions have already been asked and answered, like staffing and resourcing. You gave me heart palpitations with ground search and rescue and one budget ask. I think that's going to be an interesting journey to take with everyone, because the 4 teams are so differently resourced. So that, I think, is going to be very interesting. So, and the coordination with the province. So I'm left with my question around the hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment. So that new report is due by June of 2025. And in the report, it says, that it's one of the cornerstone documents, right, that we base the remainder of the emergency management program on with the strategic plan. My real concern is that the public engagement that has happened around it, with all the best efforts, we didn't get a fantastic turnout at some of those meetings, even though a couple of them were even repeated. I think one of the reasons that happened was maybe not always having the greatest connections with the groups especially some of the rural communities. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was in the St. Mary's Back Road, and there are 40 all-season or all-time residents, but then seasonally you go up to about 160 or something like that. Nobody knew about the ability to meet. And during the last significant weather events, access there is a provincial road, and the provincial road was impassable. So when we think about the coordination with the province, those are some of the things that I worry about, because we've got communities that the access is on provincial roads where we don't have the opportunity to figure out how do we get there. So the coordination with the province is so important. And the other thing is that, so with the hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment, is there an opportunity to go back out again to try to find some of those more remote rural communities and figure out how we can get some better attention there in terms of what makes them more vulnerable? And sometimes what makes them more vulnerable is not a municipal asset, but a provincial one. So, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, through to the councillor. So the HRVA program is moving along, and my understanding is that there will be opportunities for further input, and it's also my understanding that the HRVA will be an ongoing process. So instead of having what I would call a forklift of doing nothing and then a whole bunch of work and then leave it for 4 or 5 years and then come back again, the concept that would be constantly being refreshed with information coming in, and because the risk profile will change depending on what is happening. So we'll need to have that constant discussion, either through mitigation to reduce the risk, or if something is occurring in an area that is increasing the risk. So, so I would say that would be an ongoing piece with that. And I'm hoping that, and again, that with the volunteer and the GEMS committee, that we'll be able to have more tentacles out into communities and trying to get information. The staff were quite busy trying to do these sessions over the summer. You know, I was aware that some of them were not as well attended. So I think as we continue to work through this, I think we would just have to work harder on getting the message out, and especially finding if there are areas that we are not getting feedback from, we need to seek them out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for this report. Very critical work that's happened here. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you discovered when you looked at HRM in the context of the province, and if there are major gaps there that we haven't already discussed this morning. And I'm also wondering if we move to a higher standard, fully support this, a model like Ottawa's, will that not open up new differences between HRM and the province if we move to a different standard on our own?
Mr. Mayor, through the councillor, I don't believe so. I think it would actually give us the ability to have conversations around particular items. So if there's a piece that we have, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think we can make unilateral decisions. When we look at the various aspects of the EMAP plan and we start to document it, fundamentally, we would have to be able to say who else are the stakeholders in this. So it would be the province. For instance, just this morning we were talking about our First Nations communities. We have some we have agreements now in some places that haven't been looked at for a very long time. So there's going to be a lot of stakeholder work to be done around all those pieces. There were some areas that when we were in operation phase that there was not a response from the, not a response from the province, but the province didn't have a response to the question. So I'm hoping that now that some of these questions that came up during that may become part of the provincial discussion. So one was, for instance, animals. So what are we doing with animals in an emergency situation? Well, there was a livestock issue in the South Shore. So rather than HRM creating their own animal and livestock policy, maybe we can piggyback, and then are we able then to utilize provincial resources when those things occur? So it's about understanding the issue, who are the players, and then where are the resources that we can go to get to assist, as opposed to HRM building everything out and just looking at ourselves internally. There will have to be discussions with other stakeholder groups.
Okay, so that's built in and made more explicit through this process. Okay, all right, thank you.
CEO?
Yes, through the mayor to the councillor, to add to that response, the timing for us to be doing this is probably good, because it's concurrent activity with the work the province is doing to set up their new Department of Emergency Management. And I will be part of a committee of CAOs from across the province that will be providing some advice and input to the province. And I know the mayor is going to be invited to be on a committee with mayors who are providing some advice and feedback. So I think it's good in the sense that as we work through this exercise, even if we're a little bit ahead of the province, it will be identifying for us the right questions to ask, the right feedback to provide that would help us close what we believe may be, existing gaps or areas for improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question. You mentioned Ottawa is the only city in Canada that currently has one of these plans, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Actually, it's when I was looking for a standard, I found the EMAP program, and I reached out to Ottawa only to find out that the individual that was there is actually the accreditor that works. And the next week, they came back and said, hey, what about EMAP? I said, hey, I just talked to Ottawa. So yes, they've gone through the cycle twice. It took them a few years to get to the accreditation, but I believe they've been accredited twice. And just a little bit about the program, it's a not-for-profit made up of emergency management from across North America. So the standard is constantly being inputted in with new updates from emergency managers. So it's not a stagnant standard. So the hope is, as I said, is to be able to use that as a roadmap and as a bit of a report card on how we move our program forward. And as unfortunately, when bad things happen, they do after-action reports. Those shouldn't be informing the new standard. And if someone says, oh, we never thought about that, that should get added to the standard. And then we collectively do that. So that's really, I think, one of the big purposes. So the hope would be, as we work through this, is get to the point that we are accredited to the EMAP standard.
Yeah. So they've had it for a while, obviously. I just think about when they had the convoy protests in downtown Ottawa, there seemed to be no plan. There certainly was no cooperation among governments. I mean, I've been in the EAC here on a number of occasions, far more than I wish. And there does seem to be cooperation here between provincial, municipal, and federal governments and all the agencies. And for all the differences we may have with some orders of government in time of emergency, what I've seen is that we actually do pretty well on those things. We do joint press conferences on a daily basis. Billy, as you know, you've been dragged into some of those with me, and Erica has as well. So I'm interested. I think Councillors Morris and some others got into this, but the communication piece and the intergovernmental cooperation piece of this. Can you just speak to that a bit?
Mr. Mayor, I won't comment on the Ottawa response. I don't have enough background on that. But what I would say is
just to be clear, look, I know Mayor Watson very well and what he was going through at that time. I'm not blaming anybody for what happened. There just didn't seem to be, yet the provincial government was hands off, and the feds were telling the province to get in, and the province was saying it was the city's problem. It just seemed, and that could be admittedly from an outside point of view.
Yeah. So what I would say is that EMAP will provide us with the roadmap to get the documentation. That doesn't mean we're going to be successful operationally. So what we need to do is get the documentation. We need to exercise. We need to work it. We need to have people up to date on it. So it's not just about getting the binder and putting the binder on the shelf and saying we're done. So I think there's a lot of work, and that's a lot of intergovernmental, interagency work. I guess I would say to that comment, we are very fortunate to have the co-location of the provincial EOC and the Federal Coordination Center at the Spicer Building. It creates a closeness. You see people in the hallway, so when things are going bad, it's not about you're calling some number and getting some random person, you have no idea who's on the other end of the phone. You actually, know who it is, and if you can't get them on the phone, you walk down the hallway and knock on their door. So I think that has certainly contributed to the level of camaraderie and good work at the level. Now, all that said, I think there are still things that we can be doing better, and I think EMAP will help us document some of those pieces. One of the good things, I'll go back to my time with Barry. Barry had great relationships with a lot of people, but when Barry left, those, a lot of the relationships went. And the unfortunate part of it, a lot of the documentation didn't get passed along or upgraded. So this is really about creating a sustainable, ongoing piece of work that as new people come in, they'd be able to sit down with the various plans, read through it, understand the concept of operations, understand where they need to go to get things, and be able to kick the tires on it, as opposed to when we have an emergency and we're very, very good at it, responding. This will help us in that framework.
Okay, thank you. And I just noticed that the documents that you've looked at, there are a ton of documents on emergency planning from all the different departments. I guess what I'm hearing is that they need to be updated and they need to be pulled together into a common document, and that would be the success here. Not just the fact that DNRR and our fire guys work well when they're in each other's face, or that HRP and RCMP work well together, which they do in the case of emergencies, as we've seen far too often in the last couple of years. But this is to take all those things, make them more robust, document them so everybody's operating off the same song sheet.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. I just want to be careful that we are not looking to create operational plans for specific business units. That's not what this is. This is about the overarching umbrella coordination of how those pieces come together, and we understand where one business unit resources or responsibilities starts and ends, and what they could expect if they were to call the EOC for something. That's the overarching piece. But we're and as Larry mentioned at the beginning of this, we have very, very good people on the ground doing very, very good work. This is not taking away any way, shape, or form from the work that they're doing. This is about helping create that framework that will be able to make sure that things don't fall between the cracks, and that we're able to build and get better.
Right. So my last comment, folks, I'm not going to take any more time. 100% that. I mean, those of us who are councillors, and particularly those who've been deputy mayor with me, Tony Way and others, and David's been deputy mayor, Kathy, you see incredible work by incredible people at times of stress. To me, this is about making sure we're maximizing all that work by having a common sort of playbook, not specific business unit, but this is what happens in the case of and I also want to thank Kathy for the work that she's been doing on this, and those of us that have been involved in her review of her performance have seen that this is a priority for her as well. So thank you very much. Councillor Mason.
All right. I think, so I'd like to make the following amendment that we would add at the end of the motion 3, direct the CAO to report on the status of implementation of the report's recommendations twice yearly to the Executive Standing Committee.
Seconded, Councillor Hensby.
Pretty straightforward. We're trying to, I mean, we already have an outstanding Councillor Russell. It's the frog in your throat, I'm sure, that made him think it sounded like Hensby. We already have an outstanding motion to change the terms of reference for the committee so that fire and emergency management and community safety would report here, but I think that it's good that we just put a stake in the ground, and this is important stuff. We want to see updates on a regular basis. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
100%. Seconded by Councillor Russell. Ready for the question, colleagues? We vote by hand? I guess we'll vote by hand. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? That's carried. Councillor Cuddle?
Yeah, thank you. Just some final comments. I think it's really important, the continuity piece, for all the reasons that you've mentioned, and I just wanted to kind of recognize and highlight that that has been a concern about how that continuity happens, and that this is a bit of a living document, that it's not just, as you said, a binder on the shelf, and that it will be updated as standards change, as situations change, as our partners change. So, this is a great starting place. And just about the communication, I was also happy to hear you answer Councillor Russell's questions around that, because we know the cell phones failed. Like I think in the last hurricane, I didn't have cell phone service for 3 or 4 days. So, we need something else, and who should be on that communication is, I think, those communication channels is, I think, something we need to look at. And then finally, just a comment, a bit of, off of what Councillor Deputy Mayor Daigle Gammon was saying about people not showing up, not knowing about these meetings, not knowing where they fit. And, I've had in the past year the 60th anniversary of the Heron Cove Fire Station, and we had a big celebration with the Terrence Bay Fire Hall. And in those celebrations, you meet people who've been around for a long time and talk about how the communities used to be so engaged in their emergency preparedness, everything from the women's auxiliaries raising money for equipment to communities building their own fire trucks. And I think about, in today's terms, the amount of risk that those communities would have been taking on in those situations if we were to measure it by today's standard. But back then, it was a culture of really people stepping up to come and participate in the well-being and the safety of their communities. So I do think in this, when we're looking at that part, the culture piece of the communities really needs to be something that's considered about how we re-engage people, because we've lost that. And, once you lose it, it's hard to get back. And, I just think it needs to be something that we think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was one other point that I forgot when I was on there before, and a little bit more around the provincial coordination, but a concern around the Nova Scotia Guard. We had talked about the comfort centers that might be community-based or the ones that are actually approved through community safety, and we know what to do. So I'm just wondering where this, I don't know what the terms of reference are for the Nova Scotia Guard. I haven't seen too much about that yet. So I'm just wondering where that might fit within all of this as well, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, through the councillor, I've just come back from almost 2 weeks off, so I haven't seen anything in the last 2 weeks. But I do know that there was a meeting with Volunteer Fire Services. There was the meeting with the Ground Search and Rescue, and that there was more to come. I have not seen anything yet come out of that, but I can certainly check on that and get back to you later today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
CAO?
Yes, if I could contribute to that answer. I attended the virtual meetings with the volunteer fire departments and the Ground Search and Rescue and the province. And there was also invites to other CAOs. The next steps is the advisory committee that's been established with the CAOs. We'll be meeting later in June with the provincial folks who are working on the terms of reference.
Thank you.
And as Kathy indicated earlier, I have been asked, and I have agreed also to be on an elected officials group. I've indicated, look, I'm not going to be around all that much longer, but they've asked me to do it, and I'm quite happy to do that. Councillor Hensby?
Just let folks remember, reminder, this Wednesday from 3 to 4, there's a Zoom call being done through Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities about the Nova Scotia Guard with Paula Flesch and the Minister.
Very good. Good reminder. Okay. Folks, are ready for the question on the main motion? All those in favor? Those opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much, Larry, and Greg, thank you for being here as well. Appreciate that. And Billy, it looks like you got some sun when you were out working on the house in Pictou County, probably. Thank you. And Kara, for being attentive the whole time. Thank you. All right, we're going to move to 1312, Standards for Residential Occupancies, Comm Strategy Youth Advisory Committee. Councillor Mason?
Should I make the joke? Should I make the joke? I'll move this as the youngest councillor in the room. I move that the Executive Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council endorse the communication strategy outlined in the discussion section of the staff report dated March 11th, 2024. Oh.
I don't know what the rules are here.
Most
Councillor
respected.
Mason, in Parliament, you cannot refer to somebody's age. At all.
Even your own? Even your own?
Because by identifying yourself as the youngest, one might assume the rest of us are older. So anyway, go ahead.
I apologize for my unparliamentary
No,
joke.
it could be right here.
I think this is great. I'd like to thank the Youth Advisory Committee for having a look at this. I did not have a chance to reach out to the CAO and the clerk and say, is this the right wording for the motion? It doesn't look like it endorsed communication strategy outlined. It doesn't bind us, but I think they did some really good work, and certainly when the M200 was being redeveloped, the communication strategy was something that we spent a lot of time talking about. So I think it's a good bunch of recommendations. I'm not sure what happens to it at this point, though. I guess looking to the CAO for a little bit of clarity on.
So with respect to using the word endorse, I think the word endorse is used because technically a communication strategy is administrative and the CAO could just approve it and do it. So I think that's why they've chosen to use the word endorse. The way recommendations coming from some of our lived experience committees are meant to roll is that they come to the standing committee that they report to, and then they move on to council.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm happy to make this recommendation to council.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much. I'm also thrilled to see this and to see that the Youth Advisory Committee is engaged in putting this together. That's been a fantastic change over the past few years. It mentions that you're looking at post-secondary schools, and most of them are located on or near the peninsula. I'm wondering if it would include those that are all over HRM, including, for example, the Maritime Business College in Downsview Mall. That's thing one. Thing two is I'm wondering how multiple languages would be addressed. We do have a significant international population, and if this is addressed in strictly English, we're going to miss a lot of people. And finally, how will success be measured and reported?
So Katie, I know, has been very involved in the youth. Do you want to speak to it, Kathy? Do you have any thoughts on it? Our clerk, who's been doing a lot of work with Youth Advisor.
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor, the Youth Advisory Committee has been really adamant on getting it rolled out to as many people as they possibly can. And I think the multi-language approach would be something addressed through the communications team. I don't see why it couldn't be rolled out to multiple universities and post-secondary institutions because they're really trying to reach as many people as possible. They also had an interest in having it included in high schools as well. So when people are leaving high school and going into university, they know what to expect from their residents even and where they're living. So I think rolling it out to as many people as possible would be ideal.
Okay.
I will.
CAO? Yeah.
I will note, we also have multilingual program guidelines that are about to be rolled out. Well, a multilingual strategy is about to come forward. And the lead for the multilingual strategy is within the diversity and inclusion group, which also supports the lived experience committees. So I know that the people who support the Youth Advisory Committee are talking to the folks that are doing the multilingual strategy. So we can easily make sure that they're married up when the communication starts.
Okay. Thank you, and I would appreciate some consideration for how success is reported and tracked. Thank you very much.
I'll just say before I go back to Councillor Mason, I've spent some time with the Youth Advisory Committee in the last little while, through Katie in particular, and the Deputy Mayor joined me at a very interesting meeting we had that I thought was going to be half an hour, and I think it was 2 hours, Kathy, long after the pizza ran out. So they are engaged, and they're interested, and they're thoughtful. I think that they're in a fairly good place right now, and I'd ask Katie, just generally, if you've been kind of the leader of this from our point of view, if you could just talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. The Youth Advisory Committee recently received 6 new members, which will be really great because they were having some issues with continuity, but we did a really comprehensive onboarding package with them so they can understand what the committee's been working on for the past year, rather than coming in and not really knowing what's going on, which has been really helpful. And now they're really engaged with the election coming up as well, and they're kind of looking at different ways they can convey what they think is important to elected officials in a way that's appropriate. So they have a lot of really cool, exciting work coming forward, and they're a great group. And council, you're always welcome to come and visit the committee, and they typically meet here or in the Youth Powerhouse Center just off of across from the public garden. So they're a really great group. They have a lot of really exciting work coming forward and would love to hear from all of you.
Clearly, 10 o'clock on a Monday morning is not a good time for them to come to see us at Executive. We've talked about that. We'd like to do that, and that's why we try to go to them when they're available. But if there's an opportunity, and I would encourage, and maybe Katie, we can, make sure that all of council know when the Youth Advisory Group is meeting and to drop in. I know Mancini would, happy to do that. They're doing good work, I think, and I really appreciate the fact that they're doing it, and your leadership on that as well. Katie. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure they're still being printed, but when we first did the M200 bylaw update, they actually did them in 6 languages. So I know that was already, being the university counselor, right? Like I, helped hand them out, and we had them available at the student union buildings and all that stuff. So I assume that's still happening. Should make sure it is. Might be a good idea, Katie, to see if we can get someone from building inspection and building standards to come down and talk to them about what we are doing right now. But just thought I'd share that with the committee. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And they have had some pretty good guest speakers, too, just as the Women's Advisory Committee has had. I think Shannon's been in to talk to them and a number of folks on staff and outside. Okay, on this, ready for the question? All those in favor? All right, opposed? None. We have no motions. We're going to look at our in-camera. Does somebody want to suggest the minutes, perhaps? We'll do them one at a time. So 15-1, the minutes, Councillor Hensby, seconded by Councillor Russell. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Hensby?
Item 15.2, the Executive Standing Committee, 1, adopt the recommendations outlined in the private confidential report dated May 7, 2024, and 2, direct the private confidential report dated May 7, 2024 be maintained private and confidential.
Second, Councillor Mancini. Any discussion on that? Ready for the question? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Added items, Katie? Nothing? Notices of motion, colleagues? Our next meeting will be June 17. That would be it for the agenda. If somebody wants to propose we adjourn, Councillor Russell, we will adjourn. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today, Councillor Morris.